This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, and we are back for season 5. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Irene, before we talk about the campaign to bring WNBA superstar Brittany Griner home, let us take a moment to thank each of our listeners and viewers. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with others.
Indeed. And that said, a tsunami of thanks I send your way. But before we begin, we want to give a hearty shout out to our creative producers, Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Hear, hear.
I want to apologize to my teammates, my club, Gemka, the fans, and the city of ECAT for my mistake that I made and the embarrassment that I brought onto them.
On February 17, 2022, Phoenix Mercury superstar Brittany Griner was arrested and detained in Russia on drug charges. She had vaporizer cartridges containing less than a gram of cannabis oil. In May 2022, the U.S. State Department determined that Griner was being wrongfully detained, and Griner's wife, Sherelle, took to Good Morning America and other media outlets to plead for support from President Biden. By July, President Biden was working on a possible trade to bring Brittany back to the United States. However, on August 4th, the Russian court found her guilty and sentenced her to 9 years in prison and fined her 1 million rubles, which is approximately $16,301. Irene, will BG have to serve the 9 years before coming home?
Oh my God, Emmett, you know what? This pulls at my heartstrings. I'm worried and I pray for her and her family and her wife really every day. But Emmett, it's not happenstance that she gets arrested a week before Russia invades Ukraine. And as we all know, we're backing Ukraine, and many feels that this is us, meaning the United States, having a proxy war with Russia. But it's very interesting. They caught a big personality because there are a lot of political prisoners here. And the geopolitical complexities around Griner, it makes her a pawn also for Russia and for the United States. But listen, we ought to start with us, meaning the United States, because Griner is a Black queer woman, and she's not the first American, to be detained in Russia here. But her detainment, to me, speaks to some of the larger issues around oppression and struggles in this country around race, class, gender, and sexual orientation, because these multiple identities in society here are the very thing that America kinds to sort of talk softly about on an international stage. But I say Russia like to stroke these tensions in the United States, especially, I feel, when it comes to exposing America's hypocrisy on a huge stage. And this is a world stage. And in this moment, it causes America, really, that sort of touted out as this paragon of democracy and American exceptionalism, to begin to look at the kind of hypocrisies here. Because one, the very first thing that came out when she got arrested, and we sort of got over the shock of it, is like, why is Brittany in Russia? Vast salary cap between the NBA and the WNBA. So and also by virtue of her being an African-American woman, she exposes the racial problem in this country, which we got to see a sample of it on a world stage in 2020 with George Floyd. And the whole idea that if we say Black Lives Matter, where are we going to be around Britney Spears? But listen, another thing, another hypocrisy, LGBTQ issues here. Now we know how Russia feels that LGBTQ people are an internal enemy, to the republic. But we're supposed to be a people of democracy. But now we're faced with someone like DeSantis, who is the governor of Florida, with this whole almost edict, don't say gay here. And we have numerous, anti, trans bills across the country. So who's how I want to know what will be her get out of jail card. How would it come about? And will it be the United States doing it, or will it be because Putin just said you can go now?
Are you done? I mean, you are so riled up that you called the sister Britney Spears instead of
I
Brittany
mean,
Griner.
yeah,
I
Brittany
mean,
Griner, yeah,
I feel you.
right.
I mean, I feel you. I too have been praying for her, Sherelle, and not only their family and teammates at the Phoenix Mercury and all of the sisters from the WNBA and all of the
Yeah,
phenomenal athletes there. But this is, and you mentioned it. I mean, she was a McDonald's All-American high school player. She was a member of the NCAA champion Baylor Bears. I mean, just a
an Olympic.
phenomenal.
Let's
I
remember
mean,
this: an Olympian.
yeah, I mean Olympian, but also I mean 8-time WNBA All Star, WNBA champion. I mean every record there is, she has been somewhere within reach if she hadn't reached it. And so I agree with you that this is not happenstance. That this was an opportunity for whomever, right? And I don't think we're even doing conspiracy theories because we are actually talking about somebody who is an American superstar. And you mentioned all the intersections that you talked about. And so, I feel that as a black woman, as a black queer woman, that the stakes are even higher. And I'm tremendously disappointed in
Yeah,
our nation, in the
right.
leadership of our nation, for
Yeah.
not doing any and everything possible to bring this sister home. I'm
Oh,
absolutely
yeah.
disappointed. I'm
Yeah.
distraught. I'm frustrated.
I agree with you because one of the questions that was raised constantly, and I've heard this, was that if this was LeBron James, would we be more aggressive in trying to bring her home? And then the other thing, I don't know how much people have paid attention to the optics, but the optics have bothered me a lot, Emmett, in this way. So, have you seen one of the image where she's walking into the courthouse with two guards and a
Yeah.
police dog? I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, I mean,
Yeah.
wait. I mean, she's handcuffed, so it's not like her hands are free. But I mean, I laugh out of nervousness. It really bothers me. And then the whole thing that Russia kind of pushes back, and I don't know how much the United States is acquiescing to it, but it's like, well, they don't really want a megaphone, diplomacy. And this is why Britney Spears' wife has said at first,
Brittany
it,
Griner.
Brittany Griner, right? It's so interesting. It's so interesting. Yeah, this is the problem. I worried that I would say that, especially having read something about her about Britney Spears. But anyway, Brittany Griner. The thing that bothers me is this megaphone diplomacy here that Russia says doesn't work for them. But then if you keep it on, you keep it quiet, it disappears. So the United States on one level, and I feel for her wife. They're between a rock and a hard place because then my question is, what is the right tone? What is the right, decibel level to shout out that she is wrongfully, detained? And I want to say another thing because they say, well, they found contraband on her, right? I say allegedly because I read somewhere where she said, I do wonder how that got in my bag. And again, we always got to think of the timing. It was a week before Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really, really problematized in this scenario, and I think you raised it with the whole LeBron James analogy, is the fact that not only is she black, not only is she queer, not only is she a queer woman, but she's an amazing athlete. And within the notion of, kind of American athletics, it's still a male chauvinistic kind of, approach to things. And so to have her, this phenomenal black queer woman who is, I mean, there's no equal standards here and
That's
there's no
right.
parity here. And so the
Yeah.
other thing that I think is that, within the black community, it took her wife to come out of her own sense of mourning and grief, her own
Yeah.
sense of dealing with this trauma, to take the stage in order for America at large to pay attention and to care about this. And
Right.
here once again, black folks have to put our suffering on the front of the screen in order to plead for the rest of the nation to see us not only as citizens and or
As
Americans,
human
but to
beings.
see as a
Yeah.
people who are worthy of the same kinds of energy, that, if it
Yeah.
was a soldier or whatnot. I mean, this
Yeah.
frustrates me to no
But you know
end.
what
You
the
know what,
good thing
Irene? I
though?
think I
Okay, but
what's
I
that?
just want to say the wonderful good thing about this is, and I just applaud her, is that Brittany is queer, and at one time you wouldn't get black queers to be out in the public media. But I want to tell you my disappointment about it though here. So the black community is supporting Brittany, wholeheartedly. But my question is, where's the white LGBTQ community? Because my question is this: if it was Megan, and I think her name is Rapono, the soccer player, okay, would there be a different kind of outcry? Would there be a kind of coalition in terms of putting more pressure on Biden around this issue?
You done called Megan Rapinoe in here
That's her
to
name,
the
okay.
table. Um, Listen, I think we both need a break because I know you flustered,
Yeah,
you and Britney Spears, and I'm
yeah.
flustered. So let's take a break. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, and we'll be right back.
I knew.
I don't know. I was grateful for the call. You say she's top priority, but I want to see it. And I feel like to see it would be me sending BG on U.S. soil. At this point, I don't even know who I'm getting back when she comes back.
This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We're back. The opening sound was of Brittany Griner herself in prison in Russia. And that clip was from Live Now from Fox. You just heard Sherelle Watson Griner, Brittany's wife, on Good Morning America, recorded live on May 25th, 2022. Irene, you heard Sherelle talk about her conversation with President Joe Biden and his articulation that bringing BG back is a priority. And Sherelle actually questioning that. The other thing that you heard Sherelle talk about was she didn't know what shape or who was going to return. The trauma, the absolute trauma of this situation. I mean, is this, and we don't talk about that enough. But as ministers, you and I know that these type of scenarios change a person. They change your spirit. They change your mindset. They change your will in many ways. And so, who will come back? What do
Right.
you think, Irene?
Yeah, I do worry about whether she'll be a shell of herself here. Will her spirit be so broken? Will she be so broken that she could never even, function in with the rest of her life, let alone going back, to the team here? That's a serious problem here. But there's a couple of other problems here that bothers me here. I'm hoping, and unfortunately, she becomes the sacrificial lamb in this. I'm hoping that the NBA can get the same kind of salary as the NBA, and I hope that the NBA advocates for that, because the reason why she's over at Russia, see, if there's so many inequities here that by the time she's incarcerated here, she becomes again this geopolitical pawn, and symbol for both the United States as well as for America. She's playing in Russia, who she's a star there as she is here, in a place that is so isolated. It's about 15 miles from Siberia, which we all know about that. But the question I want to get at about the political prisoner, it's going to be more of an issue here of her coming back in some way than it is in Russia, because the whole question is this: Mark Vogel was detained last year for something equivalent to what Brittany got detained for. We all know about Paul Whelan. And this is where the issue of race comes in, celebrity, status. How do you move on this chessboard, Emmett, when you got the issues we got in America exacerbated by prisoners who are long in the queue? What, and is it political expedient for Biden to do it because we gave him the black vote? He wants the black vote. He wants to get reelected. Then it's so much of a quagmire and a chessboard game.
Well, it is that. I mean, it's extremely complicated, and there are a lot of conflating issues. I think, the piece about the economics of it, though, I think you're right on the money. We asked the question earlier about LeBron James, but LeBron James wouldn't be in this scenario.
That's
LeBron
right.
James, first of all, would not be probably flying commercial at all. Second of all, he wouldn't need to play in an overseas team, even if it is the best team in the Euro League. He wouldn't need to be there. And then
That's
third
right.
of all, if this did happen for LeBron James, I can only imagine that the United
That's
States
right.
military and all of its
Mm-hmm.
branches would be over there to rescue, this
Big.
great American athletic hero. So the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there is a double standard based on this notion of gender and based on the disparities in terms of economic treatment of these athletes. I mean, we have a huge problem. And you're right. You
Yeah.
opened up talking about the American hypocrisy and how can we
Mm-hmm.
be the defenders of democracy and the greatest nation on the world when we don't even stand up for our own, when we don't
That's right.
treat our own with honor and with valor, and we don't treat our
Right.
own with respect and dignity and with the
So
American
yeah.
pride. So
So
we
the
got a
question is,
huge problem.
right. So the question is, as we're trying to sort out, this huge puzzle, what will be her get out card here? And so it seems like, and it makes Biden look impotent on a world stage. It does say whose lives matter. Of course, the gender inequities. There is so much inequity stemming from our end that I think it makes it even harder to leverage with Russia in terms of what we can demand, given where we are, as Americans.
Well, let me mess around with you a little bit, Irene, because if this was back in the '80s, we know that your dear friend, classmate, and former neighbor, the Reverend Al Sharpton, would probably be on the plane trying to go get BG. And if it wasn't Al Sharpton, it'd be the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So I'm just wondering here. I'm wondering if somebody like Reverend Raphael Warnock may actually take this and be a leading voice, because you remember the WNBA supported him down in Georgia, for his election, senatorial election. And that WNBA team actually went against somebody who was an owner of their own team. So
Hmm.
I'm just wondering if somebody like Reverend Raphael Warnock will show up and kind of displace President Joe Biden and be that American voice, particularly in the year of an election cycle when the Democrats
Yeah,
are not
yeah.
necessarily all aligned around Joe.
Right. But you know what? This talks about the politics again.
You're
As I
right.
had
You're right.
mentioned, it's very much about, that's why it becomes a chess piece, and just sort of, because the question is how do you play your hand here? And one of the things, you're right, and you wonder, because back in the day in the 80s was this whole case, and you were too young to remember, Emmett, but there was this, and so too my producers, so listen up, okay? But Tawana Brawley, this was
Oh yeah.
somebody of no name, when I mean this in the best of way, someone of
Yeah.
no name and of no stature. But yet that became an international issue, as so too the Central Park,
Yeah.
it's actually Central Park 6. Five,
6. That's right.
okay, I need to correct that. But 5 were exonerated. So, but my point is, what I want to get at, there's the politics for Biden. Biden is interested, to me, in and Griner, as far as it will advance his political agenda here. I do need to say this, but it will certainly exacerbate already racial tensions in the
Yeah.
society, because now, if we're about, see, because people will say this, she's been there but a minute, okay? But you got other political prisoners that has been there for 16 years and longer, and others, in terms of, they don't have a clue. We don't have a clue who they are, other than the ones that Russia wants to make known. So my point is that, to me, Warnock, to me, this is how I feel, doesn't have the gravitas, doesn't have the kind of name recognition on a global stage the way Al Sharpton, as well as Jesse, possibly could. I appreciate his gesture if he went, but I think that Stacey Abrams could do more than Warnock. Yeah, that's just, listen. To be quite honest, I'm not a great fan of him, but T.D. Jakes.
Interesting. You
You
raised
know?
some interesting perspectives. I think the bottom line here is that we want BG home, and we want
Yeah.
her home right now. Irene, perhaps you can bless us with a final word.
All right. Well, this is more a prayer request for those unjustly incarcerated. Now, as we know that Griner is the greatest female basketball player of all time. The WNBA is acknowledging Griner's absence with a decal on the home floor of all the 12 teams that has her initials BG and the number 42. One of the signs of an intolerant society is how prisons treat the incarcerated. Prisons, by nature, are dangerous places. Prisons concentrate large numbers of people in crowded conditions with little privacy and few positive social and educational outlets. While society tends to see prisoners as nameless, faceless criminals, we should not. And they need to know this: they are not forgotten. In Hebrews 13, we are told to remember those in prison as if you were together with them. They need our prayers, speaking blessings into their lives and speaking of their future re-entry back in society. I want us all to pray for Brittany, but also for all who are incarcerated. Prayers touches the deepest hurt and the hardest places to people who feel lost, lonely, and unwanted by the world, especially during the hardship of doing prison time. They are misunderstood, misrepresented, and separated from their loved ones. I ask that you pray for her safety, emotional strength, sound mind, daily provisions, and sleep. I ask that you remember those who are falsely accused by their names in your mind when praying. I pray we in the world work to reform our prisons here and abroad. When it comes to the number of wrongful convictions, the U.S. is undisputed. Over 2,400 people have been exonerated in the United States since 1989. And lastly, my prayer for Brittany is this: that in her darkest and tough moments, she will call on former political prisoners like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Angela Davis, and Nelson Mandela as her reason for hope and seeing a brighter tomorrow. Ashe.
Ashe.
And amen.
Amen. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kempf, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrevduppod@gmail.com. We'll be back